Hi, good morning for those joining us live. Welcome to Surrey Police HQ at Mount Brown in Guildford. So welcome to the latest in our accountability meetings. I am joined by Chief Constable Tim Meyer and the Deputy Chief Constable Nev Kemp, as well as my Deputy Ellie Vasey-Thompson. We're going to be diving into some of the questions that you've raised, as well as looking at elements of the police and crime plan. Now, this is just one method that we have of giving you information and holding the Chief to account. You will also find, if you look on the website, the Data Hub, and there's loads of information there that you can have a look at. And as always, if there's anything that you want to get in touch about, please do get in touch with us. So as I said, we've got some questions that have been submitted ahead of the meeting. I've got other questions that I want to put to the Chief Constable and the Deputy Chief Constable. Ellie next to me is monitoring questions coming in live. So if there is anything, do pop it in the chat and we will try to get to you. We'll be with you for the next hour. And as always, this will be available on the website and on our Facebook page for you to look at later if you wish to. So without further ado, let's move on to the first set of questions. So one of my main responsibilities as your Police and Crime Commissioner is to set the Police and Crime Plan. So I took up office in 2021 and engaged in a massive consultation. Many of you responded, thank you very much, and from that we got the priorities. Before we go into the report itself, Tim, it'd be great to get your first thoughts. You've been with us 7 months now, so it'd be really great to get your first thoughts on having joined Surrey Police and where you think the force is going.
Certainly. Well, I said at the last of these meetings that my focus coming in was very much on three things: violence against women and girls, criminal justice outcomes, and our productivity. And that hasn't changed. I and my senior team have been working hard to put together a new plan for the force, and that focuses very much on crime fighting, protecting people, earning trust, making sure that we're here for people who need us, and then on 10 critical missions, all of which I won't rehearse now, but if I can just pick out a few of the things on which we're focusing in particular over the next few months. Criminal justice outcomes is an area of particular interest for us at the moment. We want to increase the rate of charging criminals. That means we need to make sure we're following all reasonable lines of inquiry which are identified and bringing people to justice wherever possible. It means that we'll be focusing more keenly on offences such as shoplifting, as perhaps we have in the past, in addition to the other crime types in respect of which we've really redoubled our efforts, notably violence against women and girls, a critical feature of which is, of course, domestic abuse. And the final area of particular interest is our productivity. We are acutely aware that given the cost of living crisis, it's incumbent upon the police to make sure we're ever spending every last pound which is entrusted to us to the greatest possible public value. And to that end, we need to make sure that our officers and staff are able to serve the public efficiently. That means really understanding some of our processes which might be more wasteful than they should, and improving those. But more specifically, it means the work we're doing in respect of the Right Care, Right Person initiative. We know that when someone is in mental health crisis, it's not really the best thing for them to be served at that point by an officer in uniform with coercive powers. That officer needs instead to be getting on and dealing with the things that only the police can do. But all too often we've found in recent years that the police have found themselves dealing exclusively with mental health matters where a crime isn't necessarily alleged or disclosed. It's not to say that we're not going to carry on protecting people in those circumstances. It just means that we're going to be following learning from elsewhere and the government directive, working with our partners across health and the local authority to find a better way of making sure that the right care gets to the right person when they are in need. So those are the key areas of focus at the moment: improving our productivity, improving the rate of catching and apprehending the criminals, and making sure we're bringing to justice those who need to be in the court system, and redoubling our effort in respect of violence against women and girls, particularly domestic abuse and rape and sexual offences.
Great, thank you very much, Tim. And talking about the police and crime plan, so we're now going to do a bit of a dive into some of the areas. Just a reminder, so the 5 key areas in the police and crime plan are, as Tim has just said, reducing violence against women and girls, protecting people from harm in Surrey, working with Surrey communities so that you feel safe, strengthening the relationship between Surrey Police and the public, and ensuring safer Surrey roads. Surrey Police have compiled a comprehensive report with a lot of data on this, and I would encourage anybody to have a look at that and read it as well. But I'm going to do a bit of a dive into some of these topics now and answer some of your questions as well. So, as Tim has just said, and one of my main priorities is reducing violence against women and girls, really shining a spotlight on those few men who really do abuse their positions and abuse their power over women and their inappropriate behaviours. And I'm very keen that we are holding perpetrators to account for their actions, and of course making sure that the best possible support is available for those victims in those cases. So Tim, coming to the first question, there does appear to have been a notable drop in recorded serious sexual offences and other sexual offences. It's a massive challenge, of course, for the police, making sure that victims feel confident, feel able to come to the police and have the confidence to come forward. Does the drop present any concerns for you?
Well, I think it's important that we look at the trend line rather than the headline. And the long-term trend line does suggest increased reporting of rape and sexual offences, which of course tends to suggest an increase in confidence to come forward, as we know that historically in the past these cases have been underreported. That isn't to say that we're not concerned when we see that drop off, but we need to look at a longer term trend to see if it's a real cause for concern. It's probably a good opportunity for me to focus on those things which we are doing to try to improve confidence of people to come forward, and also the victims sector organisations who represent victims and survivors of violence against women and sexual offences. But it's worth just alighting on the statistics for a moment. So we saw offences decline during the 2020 lockdown period, and then we saw a steady increase of reporting up until last year. But the volumes of reporting have indeed been below average over the last year or so. We have recently adopted what's known as Operation Soteria, which is a really encouraging government-backed, all-force adopted initiative to improve the service which is given to victims in cases of rape and sexual assault. What that means is that we take what is known as a suspect-focused but a victim-centred approach, and it means that we understand much better what some of the myths might be in respect of these type of offences. That could include delay in reporting, issues of so-called consent or credibility, and we understand much better how it is that particular suspects might target particular vulnerable victims, and how best then to deal with people in those circumstances. And there's good evidence from studies elsewhere that this increases rates of engagement, it increases rates of reporting, and in cases where often the only witness might be the victim and the suspect, it's absolutely vital that we retain that victim's cooperation as best as we possibly can throughout the investigation and from report right through to court. Meanwhile, we're also doing lots of preventative work, notably with our university partners at Surrey and Royal Holloway, and I think we're going to be coming on in a later question to a very encouraging initiative we've adopted in Surrey known as Operation Shield, which I hope will give more confidence to people about our approach in this area.
And I think that's a perfect time to actually talk about Operation Shield. I know Ellie's been out in Guildford recently with officers. Do you want to tell us a bit about that, what you're seeing sort of coming out of it?
Certainly. So, understandably, there has been a concern in the past that the authorities engage in so-called victim blaming, and there is a tendency perhaps when we've looked at offences to look at the behaviour of the victim and somehow judge their behaviour in those circumstances as having encouraged the attack rather than looking at the behaviour of the perpetrator. And Operation Shield is very much about identifying prospective perpetrator behaviour. It's a nighttime economy operation which is well tested in other forces, and it makes use of both overt and covert policing and really cutting edge methods of behavioural detection to identify some anomalous behaviour which doesn't go with the behaviour of everyone else in the nighttime economy, and identify people who are suspicious and just don't fit in those circumstances. And whilst I can't go into the precise detail of individual cases, what I can say is that when we've run these operations so far, we have identified people who had no legitimate reason for being in those town centres other than we suppose to act with malintent towards potential victims. And that means that we understand who they are, we've got intelligence about them, we can take enforcement action where appropriate, and it's going to be an operation that we run again and again. I hope that that gives confidence to the communities that we'll be out there not only visibly but also identifying people who might pose a risk.
That's great, thank you very much. Moving on now to the priority around strengthening the relationship between Surrey Police and the public, and Tim and I are actually all four of us are at the moment engaging in a tour around the county. We're doing one meeting in each borough and district, and we'll also be doing some virtual online ones for those of you who aren't able to get to the meetings in person. They'll be taking place in January. So talking about the sort of the strengthening relationship, making sure that people feel that they are able to contact the police whenever they need to, but also making sure that the police are visible in those areas that we know matter to you as well. So I go to the first question, Chief Constable. So grade 1 response times we know are really struggling at the moment. It's been getting better within the contact centre, and an enormous amount of work has gone into it, but we're not seeing the same improvements, unfortunately, when it comes to deployment. Can you provide a little bit more context around that and the current challenges that the force is facing, and also how they're being addressed?
Certainly. Now on this one I'm going to give way to Mr. Kemp, so over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for that question. It has been a particular challenge for us. We've seen a 39% increase in the number of grade 1s in the last 12 months, and that really has outstripped the increase in officers. But that nevertheless is a good news story, in that we have more officers now than we've had for a decade, and we've just recently had one of the biggest cohorts of new officers through, and they are being trained up at the moment. So once they are trained and operational, we will have more officers, because the first teams that they join are our response teams in uniform. So we will be able to respond better. However, it's the demand that is really difficult for us. My plea is to only call the police if you actually need us to. There are different ways you can contact us, but what I'm talking about here are the emergency responses. So they're calls that have been through our professionals in our call centre, assessed and require an emergency response. Within those grade 1s, they are trained to make an assessment as to those which are absolutely a risk to somebody's safety, and we must get to as quickly as possible. And they will, where required, pull officers off other calls in order to do that. But our average response time is 16 minutes at the moment, and I'd like to see it under 15, and that is our aim. What we've also done is to try and address the number of grade 1s and make sure that we really are only going to the calls that we're best placed to go to, and not some of the ones that the Chief has mentioned, which are better dealt with by health, for example. We have a superintendent working full-time on right care, right person, but also looking at those calls that we're responding to where police aren't the best agency, so that we can reduce those. So that, combined with the increase in establishment with our officers, should start to see an improvement. But this is a real area of focus for us, and it's one that Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary have highlighted in their recent inspection.
Excellent, thank you very much. I think we've got some public questions now from Ellie.
So the first one, I don't know where in the county this is from, but someone has written in, I tried to report a suspicious vehicle parked outside our property in the early hours of the morning, and was left hanging on the line on 999 for 7 minutes until eventually my call was diverted to Sussex Police. What are you doing to improve Surrey Police 999 call answering times? And the call was apparently never passed on to Surrey from Sussex. Why is this?
So, would you like me to answer that?
Go first.
So I'll
I've
start.
got a couple of points to make.
So in terms of improving response 999 response times, so we have on average over 500 999 calls a day. So it is a lot. And we've had particular challenges within our contact centre, partly because of what I mentioned before around the increase in number of officers. So we've had quite a lot of people who joined Surrey Police in our contact centre who have applied and been successful in becoming police officers. And as you'll know, we're in a part of the country where recruitment is really challenging. It's a tight jobs market. So actually filling those places in our contact centre has been quite a challenge for us. and they are really very skilled people, and I know both of you have sat with our call handlers and are aware of that. They are dealing with members of the public at their sometimes their most fragile, and certainly when an incident can be at its most chaotic. And particularly when it comes to 999 calls, which is obviously our emergency number. So making sure that they're good enough, and we've had some really positive comment from inspectors previously about how good our call handlers are, is really important to us. So it's not just the time it takes to answer, but it's actually that we give a decent service and we understand what's going on when we do so. The good news is as of this month, the contact centre is fully staffed, but we do have a lot of our call handlers in training. Once they're fully trained up, we should be able to answer on nines more quickly. But we still are answering them very, very fast. We prioritise those. If you ring 999, you can expect to be answered well inside a minute, normally within a few seconds.
Right.
And obviously, it's concerning to hear any report of a particular case where our response wasn't as we would have wished it to be. It is rarely the case that we rely on Sussex in that respect, but it is an example of the good relationship which exists between the forces, that we're able to support each other in those rare circumstances where one particular centre might be at capacity and needs the help of another.
Thank you. Ellie, do you have another question?
I do. Sort of on a similar topic, it's still about contact, although not necessarily for emergencies. I made a complaint to Surrey Police and always have to chase them up for an update on the status of my complaint. Why don't they keep complainants regularly updated? If they did, people would not need to keep logging up 101 to try and find out.
Well, of course, I don't know what is meant by a complaint, whether that means a report of a crime or whether it means a complaint about service. I mean, I agree with the premise of the question. Obviously, there ought to be a plan and I suppose a contract, so to speak, agreed between the complainant in any circumstances and the police about the regularity with which updates will be issued, because the last thing that we want is people having to navigate their way through the whole system to get back to the person who can get the information to them directly. So I agree with the premise of the question, and that's what officers and staff should try to do.
Thank you. So the National Police Chiefs Council, which of course both of you sit on and are represented by, announced in June all forces in England and Wales will be tending every residential burglary. What's Surrey's approach been around this?
Well, I'm really proud of Surrey's approach, actually. So we predate any national announcement in that we were attending every residential burglary before that. We recognise that burglary is a real concern for residents, and having met plenty of people who have been sadly the victims of burglary, it has a tremendous impact on them. This is always a crime we will prioritise, and that's why we were attending every one. I'm pleased to say that Surrey is still a safe county when it comes to residential burglary, but that hasn't meant that we haven't put tremendous effort into tackling it. We were at the bottom half of the national table in terms of catching and convicting burglars, and we are much better now. We're in the top half of the country for that, which is particularly enviable given that we have lower levels of burglary in the first place, and we've been particularly proactive at tackling some of the travelling burglars that come into Surrey from outside, and we've led a number of operations where burglars have been operating in a number of counties, including Surrey. We've been the lead force to take down that group in several instances over the last 12 months. So, but a key element of doing that is attending every single residential burglary, making sure that the lines of inquiry that we follow up are as good as they can be, that we're looking at CCTV, that we're really milking doorbell footage and other footage as well as we can. And that sort of leads me on to one of the initiatives that I think we're the second force in the country to have had, which is around how residents can and communities can tell us if they've got footage that is suspicious. So we've got a portal called a suspicious activity portal, and as I say, right, there's only 2 forces in the country that have this at the moment. What it does is you can see it on our website. It allows residents to send us footage that they're concerned about where there's been suspicious activity. So it may be that there hasn't been a burglary that they're aware of, but nobody knows an area like a local resident does. And if they've caught something on the increasing numbers of of home cameras that there are now. They can tell us about it, and that's been brilliant. We've had several hundred pieces of footage sent to us. It's led to 52 intelligence logs, but most importantly, a dozen now offenders that we've identified, a number of which have been charged for offences from vehicle interference through to burglary itself. So it's a really useful tool, and I'd encourage people to use that. Every single piece of footage is looked at, and you will have contact from officers from our proactive teams to thank you and update you on what's happened to it and what's led to it. So it's also hopefully quite reassuring for you to know that what the outcome of you sending us that footage was.
That's great, and I would encourage people, while they are visiting the excellent Surrey Police website, and while we're talking about being proactive, that of course prevention is always better. And as we do move into the longer, darker nights, we know that this is unfortunately the time of year when burglars do tend to start targeting houses, sadly. So do have a look at the website, where there are lots of great tips around prevention and keeping your own home and yourself safe. And I think we've got a question from the public.
We do, and this is something that comes up, a topic that comes up quite a lot across the county, and links quite well with suspicious activity that you were talking about. So Councillor Alex Balkan from Egham Hythe, Pooley Green and some of Staines has asked, how are you making preparations for the upcoming ban of laughing gas? Are you raising awareness via communications to act as a deterrent before the ban comes into place?
So this is the nitrous oxide, obviously, ban that the government recently announced.
Yeah, it's a very important question, and I confess, off the top of my head, I don't know what our plans are, but I'd be very happy to, unless you can tell me exactly what they are now, then I'd be very happy to look into it and report back directly.
Wonderful.
Okay, thanks for your question, Alex. We will come back to you on that one, because I know it's one that matters an awful lot to residents.
Yeah. Unless it might be I
can say a little bit about it, in that it was already an offence to distribute it to under 18s, and we've been quite proactive at events that happen around Surrey, where particularly music events where you get a lot of that. So that forms part of the briefing. It's particularly something we're concerned about with young people. So our schools officers and youth intervention officers, they're aware of the legislation change, and they will be looking out for that when they're interacting with young people in particular.
Great, thank you very much. Moving on now to the police and crime plan priority around ensuring that Surrey communities feel safe, because of course we know that Surrey is an incredibly safe county, but it's also very important to the Deputy and I, but also to the force, that you feel safe as well. And that we're making sure that we're intervening early. We've talked about being proactive, but also to making sure that we're intervening early to make sure that people who do or are likely to come into contact with the criminal justice system are able to receive help. Now, one of the issues that's been, I know, on a lot of people's minds, and there's been an awful lot of national chatter about it as well, and Surrey is, again, an incredibly safe county for this, is shoplifting, and sadly including the increasing number of assaults that we're seeing on shoplifters. And I think that Ellie's got some public questions on this.
Yeah, we do, and I know this is a topic that you're really passionate about, Chief Constable, and so a member of the public's written in, and as the Commissioner alluded to, Surrey's seen an increase of about 23% of shoplifting, which is reflecting quite a worrying national trend. A member of the public says, what more can the police do to support local retailers in preventing shoplifting, and will more offenders be arrested rather than let off with community resolutions?
Well, I can guarantee you that many more offenders will be arrested and are being arrested. I'm pleased that this is something which we saw coming as an issue, and have some already well-developed plans now to deal with. And just by way of context, I don't see shoplifting as remotely trivial. Theft is a serious criminal offence. It requires a real dishonest intent. And we know, of course, that the people who work in shops, regardless of how big the business might be, might well be among the lower paid. We certainly owe shop workers a debt of gratitude for keeping the country going through the pandemic, and it's right, therefore, that the police protects them and the property in their stores. And it's also a great insult to people in the cost of living crisis, or indeed at any time, who are paying for their goods to see other people not paying for those goods. Now, it might be that people are stealing out of need. It might be that they are stealing to fund a drug habit. It might be that they're put up to it as some sort of organised crime endeavour. But understanding the reason for an offence is not the same as condoning it, and I certainly don't condone it. And officers are now in no uncertain terms about our expectations in respect of what our response needs to be, where there are reasonable lines of inquiry to identify a shoplifter, whether or not that person has been detained, and we expect, and indeed are already seeing, many more arrests being made, because it's then, in certain circumstances of course, it might well be right for the person to receive what's known as an out-of-court disposal. It could be a relatively minor crime, it might be a first or early offence, and in those circumstances it wouldn't be appropriate to put someone into the justice system. But in many other cases, it's for the court to decide whether they need to be compassionate and what sanction needs ultimately to apply, rather than the police. So I expect to see many more cases of theft and handling stolen goods put into the criminal justice system, and shoplifting will most definitely be among them.
I've been fortunate enough to be out and about in Guildford on the high street with plainclothes officers and others who form a group in the town centre to do some proactive work, and I know that police are involved in a trial there in Guildford around businesses reporting offences directly using an app, which has been brilliant. Do you have any updates on how it's progressing, whether it's working well?
Well, we had a really good return last night at the community event in Guildford from the Borough Commander, who was reporting some good initial results in that respect. As the Deputy Chief Constable said in respect of the Suspicious Activity Portal, we've really moved on in policing in relation to our ability to ingest digital evidence from businesses and also private members of the public. So where shops have CCTV, engaging through our portal and making sure that we get that imagery is absolutely crucial, because that's the means by which we gather the evidence and the intelligence, not only perhaps to solve that particular instance of theft, but to put together potentially many more other cases where that suspect could have been responsible, which of course makes a more compelling case to put before the courts.
Right, thank you. Moving on to Ellie for another issue that I know affects a lot of people, which is county lines.
Indeed. We've got a couple of questions on this, which two of which I'm going to merge together because they're sort of similar and linked. So the first question is, what more can be done about county lines and to protect children being sold drugs by gangs who come down on the train from London and hang around local schools? And then we've just had a question which links really well from Kanika, who's a counsellor in Reigate and Banstead. And Kanika says, drugs is a big issue around the county, especially in schools and colleges. So what is Surrey Police doing, and what are your plans to engage with schools and local authorities as well as young people, so that you're sort of stopping the issue there as well?
Well, the Deputy has already mentioned some of the work done by our engagement officers in schools. Just to frame the issue slightly and think about this in terms not only of enforcement but also prevention. The first thing which we and partners across local authority, health and education need to do is to get better at sharing data which identifies young people who are likely to be at risk of being corrupted in this way. And there are well-established means of identifying people who are at greater risk in this respect, with reference to their circumstances at home, school, exposure to violence, drugs, life experience. And I think if we can do that over time, we can much more keenly identify the people who would otherwise be identified by organised crime groups and then corrupted. The next thing which we have to do is to think about enforcement, and that means working very closely with police colleagues in the cities who export county lines, particularly London in the case of Surrey, and work with them to identify the gangs and share intelligence on them, in that we can intervene in an upstream way to deal with the people who are responsible potentially for corrupting young people in Surrey. And then, through the excellent work of dedicated teams that we have based in Surrey, we can make sure that we're using the full range of police enforcement tactics, whether overt or covert, to identify the people who are responsible and ultimately bring them to justice. The challenge with county lines in particular is that very often the person who's committing the offence at the point of supply is both committing a crime but also exploited somewhat themselves. So it's challenging for officers both to make sure that we're investigating that case as we should, but also taking the appropriate safeguarding steps to protect a vulnerable young person. But please rest assured that's very much one of our priorities is to take out the organised crime groups who are responsible for this, and the Deputy and I deal a lot with the officers who work in this respect, but I'm not sure if I've completely done that justice
Yeah,
yet, so you'll have some other thoughts.
You have. I'll just add that we've got youth engagement
Yes.
officers who are funded by the Precept, actually, and their sole task is, as their name suggests, to engage with youth, and a key element of that is in relation to drug use, but also trying to ensure that they don't become involved in drug supply in county lines, and if they do, we get early warning of that. And what I've been delighted to see is when I spent some time with the officers from Operation Centurion, which is our dedicated team that work very closely, in particular with the Met, because that's where a lot of the county lines come from London, is that they absolutely get the balance right in relation to working to identify, as the Chief Constable said, who are driving this trade and leading it, and they do some very good technical work to do that, working very, very quickly and closely with officers in the Met who, that they are on first name terms with and speak to several times a day. And the distinction between those young people that are being exploited and may be involved in criminality but are ultimately vulnerable, and making sure that they're safeguarded. So they're very, very good at having links into social services and social care and some of the care homes to make sure that we minimise the risk to them.
That's great and very reassuring. I've been fortunate enough to be out with officers in the north of the borough while there was an operation with the Met going on, and it's the two teams work really brilliantly together and operate as one force when they're doing that, which is fantastic to see. I also know that Ellie works very closely with Crime Stoppers, and we support Fearless, which is an organisation run out of Crime Stoppers, which of course works with children as well, making sure that we're dealing with county lines issues, so that's really important. Moving on to now a topic which I know an awful lot of you have concerns about. It's something that gets brought up with me very regularly, both in my inbox but also at residents' meetings, and that is road safety. And I know that Ellie's got a number of questions from the public around road safety.
I do. So the first one has come in from Twitter, one of our cycling groups on Twitter, and they say recently West Mids Police, who had challenges around their online reporting system, made some significant changes a few months back and have really turned that service around. Are there any plans in Surrey to make similar or different changes to improve the service that's offered for people to do third-party reporting here?
I thought you were about to launch into something there, so there you go. I'll give way to you. I've got one point to make on this. But.
So you'll both remember that we had an issue with third-party reporting quite some time ago, and it's fair to say we weren't dealing with reports of third-party concerns, particularly from cyclists, as well as we should have been. That is much improved now. All of those are looked at, investigated, and we've issued a number of fines. And even taken some offenders to court since we've changed our processes there. So we do want to hear, because road safety is important. Too many people die on the roads, and that includes in Surrey. We have also a team, again this was funded by Precept, of a sergeant and 6 officers at Operation Vanguard team. They are highly trained roads policing officers, but their sole purpose is about reducing deaths on the roads. So they target those individuals that we know drive in an antisocial, dangerous way, and are really starting to have some real success in getting the most dangerous, persistent offenders off the roads.
Great. I think
Well, it might come up in a subsequent question, but I'll mention it now. That we have to remember, of course, that whilst not every dangerous driver, dangerous though they may be, is necessarily a criminal in the broadest sense, we know that criminals tend not to be the safest drivers, and they're not going to be particularly conscientious about things such as insurance or the state of their vehicle and so on. And one thing which we're very keen, therefore, to do is to really deny criminals the use of our roads. And people should expect to see, over the course of the year, some high-profile operations in particular areas which we've identified as crime hotspots, where we really use vigorously our law enforcement powers in respect of traffic and roads to target criminals who use the roads.
Now, we do have, obviously, the road network that runs through Surrey, we know in fact, the M25 is the busiest highway in Europe. And we do have an awful lot of drivers on it, not all of them from Surrey, a lot of them pass through. What should a member of the public do if you see, as I did last week, somebody driving incredibly erratically, changing from lane to lane, going vastly over the speed limit? Is there anything the public can do in that situation?
Yes, I mean, I would encourage the public to report that. If it's so dangerous, they think that somebody might come to serious harm, then that constitutes an emergency, and call it in on 999 if it's safe to do so.
Yes, of course.
Depending on the position you're in with the car, but absolutely. And of course, the great thing is on roads like the M25, there are lots of areas where we can gather evidence. So there are lots of cameras. There'll be dash cams as well from other vehicles, etc. And one of the things we can do is we can put a marker on the registration of that vehicle. So even if we don't catch up with it at that time, it will come to notice. And we can also do a check on the registered owner and knock on their door as well. So there's a whole bunch of things that we can do, but we're better if we know about it. So I would encourage people to let us know. If it isn't something that is considered emergency, the best way to do it is online.
Yeah.
But it's such an important point, because we very often hear people say, well, I didn't want to report it because the police can't do anything, or worse still, the police won't do anything, which I very much hope isn't the case. But as has been set out there, there's such a range of things we can do after the fact, as well as whilst it's happening. Now, of course, if the risk posed is immediate, then we should act immediately. But that's not to say that there's this one and only opportunity to do something about that. And I said yesterday to a community group, it's no consolation for a bereaved family that their loved one was killed in the course of an accident rather than as a course of a crime. So we should respond with the same interest and urgency.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for answering my question. Ellie?
The next one is a slightly different topic, but one I'm actually really passionate about as well. What can be done to tackle e-scooter riders who use pavements and put pedestrians at risk?
Right. Well, you've got me immediately on that one. I must confess, I don't have anything which comes immediately to mind. Do you have a thought?
Well, they shouldn't be doing it, but this is a difficult area of enforcement. Because it is antisocial using it, and it is dangerous. I think it's fair to say that it's not something we're proactively looking for, but if there are repeat calls in relation to a particular area, then we will liaise with partners in the council to look at how we can make that more difficult. And if officers are aware of it and come across it, they will make an intervention in the same way that they do if somebody is cycling on the pavement. The difference with scooters, of course, is you see a lot of them on the roads, and they're often less visible than cyclists. So there are some additional risks to the individuals using them. But it's the perennial problems that we face with cyclists. We're facing some of those with scooters, but we're not turning a blind eye. It's fair to say.
I mean, it's having just had a couple of minutes or a few moments to reflect on it. It's not unlike there are other problems like this, and we might come on to it in relation to another issue later on, where realistically, are we going to divert and deploy officers away from county lines or domestic abuse or burglary into an issue of this nature, however vexing and potentially dangerous it might be? Well, probably not, and nor would we if we were exercising good judgment how to use our resources. That's not to say, however, that, as the Deputy says, where there are reports of repeated behaviour in a particular area, we can't then think about how our safer neighbour teams might assist. And where someone has been identified, we can then do some practical intervention with that particular person. And very often a visit in certain circumstances could well be all that's needed. So, yeah. I
mean, it is against the law to use a privately owned scooter in those circumstances. I mean, there are some hire schemes, but there are none in Surrey, as you know. We do seize them. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but we've seized dozens of scooters from people who've been breaking the law.
I've certainly, whenever I've been out with our neighbourhoods teams and we've seen a scooter, which of course will always be illegal if it's in Surrey, at least words have been had, at the very least. If not, then the scooter has been seized. So I know that action is being taken despite the challenges around it. Ellie, you've got one more?
Yes, again, switching topics slightly, but this is obviously something that comes up quite often, actually came up yesterday, Chief Constable, with some of our councillors. There's been a number of car meets in the area lately, including at Sainsbury's in Burford. What measures can be put in place to prevent them and protect other road users if they do end up taking place? Now, obviously, car meets are in general legal,
Yes.
but there are points at which they become illegal and actions become illegal. So what's Surrey doing about that?
Yes, and this is something we've been monitoring as it's emerged as a trend in recent years, and people who are a little longer in the tooth will remember the early 90s when this was rather more of an issue, and then it's re-emerged in a different guise more recently. So the approach we take is very similar to the approach we would take in any other official or unorganised event, which is first of all to monitor intelligence about the prospective meets or gatherings, and that's why the information which comes into us from the public is absolutely crucial in that respect. Then it's to engage with the organisers and find out as much as we possibly can about what is planned, to make sure they're aware of the legal constraints which operate on them. And we found actually that we've seen a diminishing number of meets and incidents as we've been able to engage with people in that way. And then it's to make a proper decision about whether or not we need to deploy to them and what needs to happen as a consequence. So it's an emerging issue, but we have seen it start to tail off a little bit as a consequence of the plan which I mentioned, the policing and crime plan yesterday. I'm not sure if you can think of anything I've missed on that. No.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much. Right, we're going to move on now to a topic that I know has been in the news an awful lot recently, both nationally and sadly here in Surrey, which is that of dog attacks. I think it's good to explore this particularly obviously in a Surrey context, including look at the powers that are available to police in terms of responding to dogs that are dangerously out of control, at looking at both sort of current and historical incident volumes. I wonder, Chief Constable, if I can invite you to say a few words first on your sort of views from a Surrey context.
Yes, I mean this is an extremely troubling issue, and I know that's the sort of thing that people worry about reporting because it doesn't sound, perhaps on the face of it as serious as some of the other things we've spoken about. But obviously the consequences can be very serious indeed, and it's the sort of thing which stops people engaging in a perfectly, good recreational activity. And we don't want people to be terrified for the safety of them or their dog. So it's worth just giving a bit of national context first of all, and perhaps a little bit of information about Surrey, and then I'll speak for a moment about some of the legal stuff as well. So there has been this national increase in fatal dog attacks across the UK. And the statistics I'm presented with actually suggest there's been a new dog-related fatality every 6 weeks, which of course is deeply concerning. Surrey's seized dangerous dogs has increased from 8, which is quite modest, in 2022 to 16 in 2023, which is still modest but concerning nevertheless. And of those, some ultimately, after proper investigation, are returned to their owner, some are destroyed, and some we continue to detain in our special facilities for detaining dangerous dogs. But people will of course know that Surrey ourselves unfortunately had a fatality tragically in January of this year when a female dog walker was terribly mauled to death. So it is indeed a very, very concerning issue. And the legislation is also relatively old now. I think it was last revisited some years ago. But nevertheless, under the offences disclosed since 2021, we have charged a couple of owners in respect of their dangerous dogs, and we've got some other cases which are being investigated pending the new legislation. Our kind of overall tactics and strategy to dealing with this are as follows. We're looking at our capability within our existing teams, because what you tend to find is when an issue re-emerges is that you need to upskill the officers and staff who deal with them. So we're looking at our capacity and capability in that respect. We're doing some new training of the relevant legislation for our officers to make sure that we're able to take the appropriate action, and that's backed up by colleagues in Sussex who we work in partnership with, and we're also increasing our capacity to seize dangerous dogs by adapting the space that we've got in our kennels and so on. But again, the most important thing really in this respect is reporting. We really do depend on the intelligence and the information coming in. Now, it might be that in certain circumstances you consider it appropriate to report it to the council and the dog warden, but it can be a difficult judgment call. If you think that a dog has been dangerously out of control, even if that's short of someone being injured, then don't hesitate to report that either to the council or to us, and we'll make sure it's looked into, because it's very important that we protect people and their dogs in this respect.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time and want to make sure we've got enough time to get on to the other issues. But just thank you for clarifying what members of the public can do, because I think that's really important and something that we get questions about. The other one, I suppose, that's particularly relevant at the moment, and we know that Parliament is looking at the XL bully dogs and looking at that. And there's a bit of transition work, obviously, that's going to go on around that. But can I just ask, how does enforcement work of banned breeds work in practice from a policing point of view? Are officers expected to be on the lookout? Do we rely on the public reporting? You've talked about how important it is that the public report.
It's not dissimilar, although perhaps more serious than the issue about scooters, in that I'm not going to suggest that officers are proactively deployed with the express purpose of looking out for dangerous dogs. Nevertheless, Surrey officers will use their good judgment, and in the course of their patrols will obviously do something if they spot something which is very dangerous, plainly an illegal breed, or which requires further investigation, and they're briefed very clearly to do that, and will do that. But it's one thing simply to spot the dog. The behaviour of the owner and the behaviour of the dog is also important as well, and it might be that the officer or member of staff doesn't see that, so that's why that reporting is really so important. I think we'd be very alive to that as an issue now.
Okay, thank you. Given the time, I'm going to move on now to something I know a lot of the members of the public raised with us. Again, another issue that came up last night at a community engagement meeting, and that is antisocial behaviour. It's 6 months since the introduction of the government's antisocial behaviour plan, and while Surrey isn't a pilot area for some of the particular action areas, I know that the Chief Constable has come in and has a particular plan around it. It'd be really useful, I think, Chief Constable, to provide a sort of summary of the proposed changes around antisocial behaviour. I know that there's an awful lot of work going on. I know it's something that you care an awful lot about and don't treat as a trivial crime. I wonder if you could just talk to us a bit about the plans that you've got in place.
So the Deputy's going to provide a little bit of the detail about what it is that we've done. If I can just say one thing at the start and perhaps another thing afterwards, is antisocial behaviour can seem, as a term, a bit of a euphemism, and sometimes it can, trivialise what are actually crimes. And within antisocial behaviour, there are substantive offences, often of harassment, of dangerous driving, of criminal damage, of violence. And it's really important that we identify the criminal offences which are going on and take enforcement action in that respect. And one of the critical features and approaches in our new plan, whether that's in respect of the people who pose the greatest risk to women and girls, whether it's in respect of the most violent people, or antisocial behaviour, I want us to identify the top places, make plain to the public that we've identified these places in partnership with them, and actually demonstrate very clear progress in taking in reducing antisocial behaviour in those areas. So that's going to be part of a new approach which will be taken and publicising. But I know, Nev, you're going to just summarise some of what we've done so far.
Yes, I mean, as the Chief Constable has said, we're in quite a good position in Surrey in relation to antisocial behaviour, in that we've got a proud record in tackling it and in problem solving, and in fact we've won national awards, and we've got officers going international to America for the Herman Goldstein Award in relation to tackling antisocial behaviour and problem solving. And we're a force that have invested in a problem-solving team. Not every force has that, you might be surprised to know. And that team focus on crime, but they also focus on antisocial behaviour. And some of the things they're doing, for example, is we're through our youth intervention officers engaging with young people to understand some of the issues that particularly bother and concern them with antisocial behaviour, and then using that team to problem solve some of those issues. And we've developed things like an app for officers in relation to begging. So the Vagrancy Act, which is particularly relevant, is a fairly complex piece of legislation, but there are some really simple things that officers can do and some orders that they can seek to reduce begging and the antisocial element of that. That's been rolled out across the county now to aid officers to make sure that they understand the law, and they've got a suite of things that are available to them to tackle it. In short, we've had a bit of a head start on the government's plan. Most of what came out in the government's plan we were already doing, and in fact we're seen nationally as an exemplar force in terms of tackling antisocial behaviour. So we're not complacent about it, and actually we monitor, not all forces do, we monitor satisfaction levels for antisocial behaviour, and we've seen a bit of a dip of those recently, which concerns us. So this is absolutely something that we're going to keep pushing. But some of the other things that have been talked about today are very relevant to this. So for example, shoplifting. If you've got a particular problem with shoplifting in a particular area, that is often linked to antisocial behaviour, and it's certainly linked to people feeling that they're not safe in their community. So a lot of the issues that we've talked about today that we're really pushing hard to tackle are directly linked to this.
Great, thank you very much. I've got a couple of public questions that Ellie's going to read. I think the first one is for resident Godalming.
Indeed. So yes, I know this comes up all across the county, and it's come up in Godalming before. This member of the public says, I'm always reporting to the police my neighbour's daily drug use, and nothing is ever done about it. Why is that?
Well, I'm very concerned to hear that, because in those circumstances we've got, not only an inherently criminal offence, but some intelligence which we should be following up in respect of the supply of the alleged drugs and perhaps other related criminality. So it might be that the person who's posed the question wants to make contact with us, and we can look into why that isn't happening in this particular case. There can be particular circumstances which might apply to particular cases, but certainly where there's open space drug dealing, for example, that has a very pernicious effect on the safety of a community, its sense of safety, the ability to people feel they can safely go about their business, and ultimately confidence in the police and the inclination of people to trust us. So I'm concerned to hear about that. It shouldn't be the case.
Thank you very much. The next question that's come in, and actually in Surrey, what I think people don't understand often is that our worst antisocial behaviour actually isn't done by children, but often children and young people are the most obvious within a community that people will recognise as antisocial behaviour. This question's come in, what more can be done to tackle antisocial behaviour committed by children, especially if it does not cross the line into criminality? And that's actually really similar to a question we've had from Councillor Balkan, so hopefully, Alex, this answers your question at the same time.
Well, this is where the problem solving and partnership to which the Deputy refers is so important. Often the line between general antisocial behaviour and criminality is hard to distinguish, and very often criminal offences, the law being quite broad, will actually be disclosed to people who have a closer look. It just might not be appropriate to put the person into the criminal justice system. But the most important thing is that we, your partners, are aware of it, can share information with each other, and can decide on a joint plan, both to make that particular location safer, but often more effectively to deal supportively, but in some cases, robustly with the young person and their family. But it really does depend on that reporting and that problem solving, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And we're going to start wrapping up in a moment, but I do want to, as well as holding the force to account, of course, it's also really important to recognise where brilliant things are happening and the great work that officers are doing. One of those is actually around something that the Deputy Chief Constable talked about, which is the problem-solving team. I wonder if there's anything particular that you'd like to highlight, the great work that's been going on with that team, because it really has been a Surrey-led initiative that's getting some really great results.
We are. I mean, there have been some fabulous results from theft from card machines, cash machines, that's the word I'm looking for. Cash machines, where we saw an increase in those. That team were deployed on that, and through analysis we've not only brought some offenders to justice but significantly reduced those in Surrey. Right through to one of the examples I mentioned earlier, where officers and the force have won an award, was where there was some indecent exposures on the canal that runs through Woking, and some absolutely fantastic work there around analysis about when that was happening, how, and also making it a lot more difficult for anybody to undertake that behaviour, put a stop to that, and we all know from a number of awful media headlines there's been recently about how that is often a signal offence and is deeply unpleasant for anybody, particularly women or children that might come across it. So they've done some brilliant work in terms of criminality. They've helped us reduce the number of residential burglaries within Surrey, and helped us in terms of tackling some of those crime groups that have been committing offences in burglary, and we've seen really good results in both of those. And they've helped our antisocial behaviour effort. They've also worked and lent their support to British Transport Police, dealing with bicycle thefts, particularly prevalent around railway stations. So they and we've got some really quite experienced analysts in that team now who when I speak to them, they absolutely love the work they do, because they can see the discernible benefit from their efforts. So it's really, really good and valued.
Great, thank you for that. And before we close, I wonder, Chief Constable, if there's anything you'd like to say about the future. Now, we know that policing continues to experience some real challenges, as do households across Surrey as well, in terms of cost of living. We are having to find savings as well. As I said at the beginning, you're 7 months in. Is there anything for the future as you look forward in terms of the challenges that we're facing?
Well, the financial position is of course uncertain when one looks at it across the country and globally. And for policing, that means we're subject to the same concerns that any other business or large organisation is. We have to think about interest rates and inflationary pressures and what effect that has on the sufficiency of our budget and our ability to pay for all the things that we need to pay for. Surrey, long before I arrived, had a very good system established over the last decade for identifying savings and increasing and improving its productivity in order to make ends meet, and we will continue to do that. But I think the focus for now has to be on the things that we've been covering in this accountability meeting, and that means making sure that we are doing our bit by following all reasonable lines of inquiry and acting on the information given to us from the public, whether that's someone working in a shop or someone reporting antisocial behaviour or drug dealing, and bringing to justice or diverting the people who are responsible for that. It's so important that we don't forget the concerns which were identified now a couple of years ago about the performance of the police and the prosecution in respect of violence against women and girls, and that we continue to improve the service we provide in respect of domestic abuse, rape and sexual offences. And because we know that we're going to have to continue to do more, potentially with less resource, we need to really make sure that we're being as productive as we possibly can. And that's a job for me and the Deputy and our senior colleagues to ensure that all of our processes are as efficient and unwasteful as possible, so that every last pound which is entrusted to us is spent on serving the public to the best of our ability. So those will be our main areas of focus over the coming months, and I imagine the years ahead.
Great, thank you very much to both of you. Thank you very much to everybody who has joined us. Thank you for your questions, particularly to, I know, our two councillors who have joined us from Egham and also from Red Hill. It was good to have you. As always, there is far more information available both on the Surrey PCC website but also on the Force website, and that will include this particular recording as well, which you will be able to watch later on. The Data Hub, of course, is always available there as well if there is any other information that you are looking for. As I said, the Chief Constable and I are currently in the middle of engagement sessions around the county, so we hope to see you at one of those. All of the details for those are of course available on the website, as are all of our contact details should you wish to get in touch at any time. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope to see you at an event soon.